most of you in class today, that's up to you. Look at the numbers in the room. We'd probably be better off if some of you were a little less good. Okay, so only the case classes. That includes, by the way, Thursday. But I think we're discussing Magnander now. Okay, sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you, guys. So, can you guys hear me well, or more or less? It's not working. Did you give me? I know you. Okay. So what I want to talk today about is this issue of value investing and competitive strategy. You want to understand a little bit this issue of franchise value that is being behind a lot of things that Bruce has been talking about in the last few days. And before we move that, let's just review a little bit of our investing process, just to know exactly whether today's lecture is going to be fitting in. So remember that we always start our value investing process. And by the way, all these slides are going to be posted right after class, so you guys can download it. So you don't need to write anything down. Everything will be available to you. Okay? So remember that we always start our value investing process with a search for cheap, ugly, obscure, otherwise ignore. We typically use a screen like book to market or price to earnings, something along those lines, and we start looking at those firms which say very high book to market, what is typically called a value stock, and among those, let's look for those that are ignored, that don't have any analyst coverage, and so on and so forth. The second step is the valuation, which is what we've been doing so far, where we actually look at, go after the asset value. We're starting in the balance sheet and looking at all the tangible information that we have in the balance sheet. Second step is actually the estimation of the earnings power value. And the third step that, in a way is what we're going to be focusing on today is actually this issue of franchise value. Okay, whether there's something there that protects the firm from competitors effectively. Okay? And there's a third step, which is the review, which is basically a know thyself type of step, where you actually want to check about all the behavioral biases that went into the calculation of any of these items. Okay? The last step, of course, is the risk management, and the fundamental concept in value investing is exactly that of margin of safety, that you have enough of a gap between the value and the price so that even if the investment were not to pan out, you will have some protection of the principal investor. Okay? Today, though, we want to keep talking about this issue of valuation and understanding this issue of franchise value. We're going to do kind of the competitive strategy side of this. Okay? Now, remember that when we actually do the value investing approach, we start basically by ordering all the information that we have at our disposal by reliability. Okay, that's what you have in the x-axis. In the y-axis, you have an strategic dimension, which is the topic of today's talk. On the left, the little blue square that you have there is the asset value. Remember, we always start with a balance sheet by looking at the assets and liabilities that we can count on. That's going to give us our asset value. Second step is actually the earnings power value. We're going to look at things like current earnings. We're going to do a little bit of extrapolation of the current earnings into the future, but we're going to do no forecasting whatsoever of earnings growth patterns. Okay, so essentially, when we do our earnings power value, once we come with a clean measure of earnings and an appropriate measure of discount, we divide one by the other in order to give us the earnings power value. And the second step, of course, I'm going to go back to this in a minute, is the comparison between earnings power and the asset. Okay? And the last step is the total value, which involves an exploration of growth. We will have to do a lot of forecasting in order to understand where this firm is going, where this industry is growing, and come with some educated guesses as to those things. Okay. Very good. So remember that once we are done with this analysis, then we can end up in case A, one where the asset value is above the earnings power value by an amount equal to that orange box that we have over there. This was the case that we discussed last Hudson General. And there we discussed, it may be the case that this low earnings power value is due to some poor management or perhaps some industry decline, and you want some catalyst in order to realize all the potential of this investment. In that case, if I remember correctly, was Mario Gavelli coming in, being an activist investor, and realizing all the value potential of Hudson General. So that's case A. And the operational word here is a catalyst. You need some outsider in order to do the activism for you if you're not big enough. Case B is the free entry industry balance, where the asset value is equal to the earnings power value. There's not much fun going on there. Everything is properly valued. entry and exit can occur, but it's an equilibrium outcome that is going to preserve the equality between asset and earnings powers values. Today we're interested, though, in case C. Okay, we want to understand the situations where the earnings power is slightly higher than the asset value by the amount of, again, that orange box. And we want to understand where is that coming from. It may be coming from simply some superior management or some type of competency that this particular firm has. But more importantly for our purposes is we want to understand to what extent this is coming from some competitive advantage. There is some barrier to entry that is going to be there. That is the source of superior profits and returns for this particular firm. That's the purpose of today's class. Okay? So that's how it fits with the framework that we've been investigating until now. Okay? So what we're going to be doing next is basically trying to understand the logic of competitive advantage, going through a particular taxonomy about the sources of competitive advantages, and trying to understand what is that we can say via examples about free entry, barriers to entry, product differentiation, and so on and so forth. Okay. Okay, let's start with the nasty logic of commodity markets, okay? So consider for a moment a competitive industry, okay? There are not going to be many formulas here, so, you know, this is as difficult as it gets, okay? As difficult as it gets, you know? So the profit is basically whatever your revenues are, minus your cost. That's a very well-accepted definition of profits, okay? The only thing is that, you know, we're going to be talking a lot about this average cost, okay? What you have in brackets is the profit per unit, okay? It's the difference between the price and the average cost. Whenever we have a situation where the average cost is below the price, then we can say this company is making profits per unit, okay? Strictly positive profits per unit, okay? So everything that I'm going to be saying, all the plots that I'm going to be showing you in the next few minutes are basically plots of average cost, demands, and everything should be understood per unit. Okay, per unit of product that this particular company is selling, per unit of a software package, per unit of per car, you name it, per can of beer. Okay. So again, P minus AC is what I'm going to be calling the profit per unit, and everything technological in this setup. Okay, all the technology is all buried in this cost function. Okay, that little cost function over here is where all this technology is. Okay, so the beautiful thing about this kind of framework to understand this is that, well, now you know everything is buried there. Very good. So there you have a situation of a firm. Remember, the assumption so far is that you're in a commodity market where there's free entry. A lot of people can come in and they catch you and offer prices that are very competitive. In this case, this firm is actually making some positive profits. Okay, notice that they're the price, and I'm not going to bother you, let's say, by explaining you how come the firm chooses this level of output. You can go into that if you guys want to, but let me just give you the necessary amount of information and not more. So in that case, notice that the price is above the average cost. So this is basically the profit per unit. Okay. Now, of course, in this case, there's an economic profit. Your return on equity is much higher than the cost of capital. You essentially have a money-making machine. Essentially, you have a money-making machine. Okay, so you can lever up all you want, and you will be able to realize any return, in principle, any return on equity that you want. Of course, the problem is that this is actually very attractive for everyone. Okay, the problem of these commodity markets, where anyone can come in, offer an otherwise similar product, and undercut you, is that your profits go away very, very quickly. Okay, this is essentially the process of entry, which will occur whenever there's an absence of these barriers to entry. What happens is that effectively, entrants offer product, prices drop, and if you are still, after all this entry, a cost-efficient firm, you will survive, but your profits will be drawn down to zero. Okay? So in that sense, whatever profits this firm saw at the beginning, well, they were dissipated after a while once we're done with the process of entry. Now, there's no minimizing, by the way. There's no how powerful this process is. Okay? It happens all the time. It happens every single day. Economic markets function very well. There's a lot of entry. There's a lot of competition. Profits are driven down to zero. Okay? And I add here the marginal cost curve, which is the one that is going to be determining your output position, were you to be the only one, the only firm in this green industry. Okay? Any questions about this?
By the way, this is what's known to you as a commodity business.
Yeah.
They only compete on price. Everybody can produce it more or less efficiently. The efficient producers survive.
Yeah.
Everybody has a horrible life, and nobody makes it.
Yes.
In the sense of nobody earns above their work.
Exactly. So it doesn't mean that these people live very unhappy lives, because they know the moment they fall off the efficient frontier, they're done with. They're going to start realizing losses, and if they're not able to get their act together via some type of efficiency gains, they're done with. Okay. Nothing here. No interest in return on equity above the cost of capital, which is what you should expect. Okay, for a lot of these commodity businesses. Okay. Well, an alternative, and one thing that people always talk about, is precisely this idea of product differentiation. What if I are able to convince my customers that somehow my product is different? Okay. Can I do that? Well, the moment that, think about it the following way. The problem of a commodity business is that you have no control whatsoever over the demand function. Okay? You are exposed to whatever movement there is out there on the price that you don't control. That's what it means to be competitive. I don't have any impact on the price of what is actually being sold in the market. If I could invest a little bit, and convince my customer base of how special my product is, even if it's not, even if it's still a very commodity, will I be able to gain some competitive advantage? This is what we want to understand. Before we went into this a little bit more, there you have a list of well-known companies, okay? So notice that on the right-hand side, you have, kind of like the fancy names, names with prestige. So you have things like Cadillac, Mercedes-Benz, Sony. You have in the retailing business, you have Gap, Lease, Claiborne, banks, JP Morgan, Citibank. Here you have some good names too. You have, of course, the Intel of the world, but also you have Target and Walmart, and you've never met anyone who's going after the Walmart look, okay? And if you do, you're not hanging out with the right crowd, okay? You also have like local banks like Wells Fargo. You have Coke. I mean, boy, do they have name recognition, okay? But as Bruce was saying, I believe last Thursday, you don't show up to your in-laws with a 6-pack of Diet Coke. Okay, this doesn't seem like the right thing to do when you're invited for dinner the first time and you're going to meet your parents-in-law. I certainly didn't do it, and I recommend you not do it either. Okay. And there's a message here. Okay, that actually building that kind of name recognition is costly. So on the right, you have these well-known prestige brands and not particularly strong profitability. It's actually costly to be well-known, recognized, build that kind of image of coolness, of quality. Okay, this is actually something that takes product development, marketing costs, things like that. On the left-hand side, you have less prestige brands, but you have this very strong profitability. Okay, in fact, some of the firms on the right-hand side have no more. So you may think that product differentiation is a way to avoid the logic of commodity businesses, okay? But I don't want you to confuse product differentiation and barriers to entry. These are two very different things, okay? So product differentiation does indeed avoid, to some extent, the commodity curse, but it doesn't free you from this intense competition for profits. And this is the reason why even firms with great name recognition fail to deliver the superior returns that you would assume they would have, given that they have this great name recognition. This just doesn't happen, okay? And if there's one important message in today's class, it's that the only true source of superior profitability is barriers to entry, something to which we shall return at length later on, okay? So product differentiation may buy you something, and we're going to see in a moment what buys you exactly, but it doesn't free you from competition. Competition is difficult to escape from it. It's almost like the air we breathe. It's everywhere around us. Okay, the moment you actually make a tiny amount of superior profit, excess profit, you're going to see everyone thinking, can I do it better? Can I do it better? Okay? We're going to see later some exceptions to this rule. That I'll go back to this. So the profit is going to be the same thing that it was before, the revenue minus the cost. The only difference that I want you to notice relative to what it was before is that before, remember, in the commodity business, here you had simply the price, which for you, it was simply something that was set exogenously. Okay, you were just subject to whatever price was out there. You had no control over it. It was determined by the market overall. You as a firm had no power whatsoever to set the price of your commodity. That's why it's called a commodity business. Okay? Now, you've invested a little bit. You've managed to create some product differentiation, and notice that something magical has happened, that instead of having the price, you have a price that depends on the quantity that you're going to be selling. You are exposed. Now you control a little bit the price of what you're going to be selling. You've managed to create a demand curve for you, essentially. You've managed to create a demand curve for you. Okay? And the question is it going to be the source of superior profitability? So let's understand the dynamics a little bit of this. Okay? So there you have the average cost of this firm, okay, and the demand function. The price, we don't need to actually understand where this price and these quantities are coming from, but in this case, this firm is making some superior profits. Okay? Now, again, you have returns on equity that are above the cost of...
That terrible to you, Tom.
Huh?
That picture is wrong.
Really?
The price is going to be off the demand curve.
Wait a minute. You're equated...
Take over Q1, you got to go all the way up to the demand curve.
That's your profit, but the way you actually set this up is by equating marginal revenue to marginal cost.
No, that determines the quantity.
That's right.
But the price that you charge to get that quantity
It's up there.
what the market will
Oh, you mean it is? I'm terribly sorry. They should be
Yes.
up there. Sorry about that. So that quantity is determined by the cross of the marginal revenue of the marginal cost. You don't need to know where this is coming from. It's the price that should be higher up. I'm sorry about the mistake. Okay? Very good. By the way, can I tell you one thing? You know why this happens? Okay? 2 hours before this class, I went to Bruce and I told him, look, these are all my plots. This is wonderful. And I said, I want you to eliminate all this. All this is crap.
I didn't say it was crap.
Well, so then I had to do this in like 5 minutes. So sorry about this. Very good. So you'll have it corrected. Okay? Very good. So what happens when there's entry? Okay? When there's entry, essentially what is happening is that the demand function is moving to the left. Now, this is something very important to understand about product differentiation. Okay, and think about the example of when the European automakers came into the United States and started competing with Cadillac and all the luxury brand names that we had in the United States before the Europeans came about. Okay, it's not so much actually that it lowered the price; it's that essentially lowered the share that Cadillac was selling of the luxury car market in the United States. So essentially, what happened is that the price, more or less remained constant. Okay, the price remained constant, but the problem is that the share that each of them was selling went down as a result of the entry by these luxury European automakers. Okay. As a result, you end up more or less where you were before. It is true that you're facing a downward sloping demand curve, but your profits are equal to zero. Exactly as in the case of free entry. Okay? Exactly as in the case of free entry. And this is actually not surprising. Okay, it is not surprising. Remember, we started with a commodity business. You invested a lot in product differentiation. Well, once you invested, you should, if it's really a commodity business, you should see no superior returns on account of this investment. Okay? You may have been able to build a brand name, but you have to take into account all the marketing and product development costs that went into actually building that brand name. That's why you end up with zero profits, a lower share, even though the price may not have suffered dramatically as a result. Okay? You end up sharing the market with other luxury car makers. Very good.
And by the way, there is a simpler way to see that. As long as there is a profit opportunity there, and they have the same access to customers, and the same access to technology, and the same access to the market, they're going to get into that market. And that market is not going to, that entry is not going to drive the price down, but it's going to mean all that investment that you made in branding and product development leads to lower sales because you're going to lose some sales to that. So your profits go But if it's still a profitable market for the entrant, guess what after the Europeans have been admitted is going to happen? The Japanese are going to look at that market and say, hey, I can do that too. And they're going to enter, and your demand is going to go down further. And as long as the profit opportunity is there, as long as some executive in Tokyo or Frankfurt can look at that market and say, hey, I can make money there. I can earn above my cost of capital there. They're going to enter that market, and the more people that crowd in, the less profitable it becomes. And they're only going to stop entering when the profit is eliminated. So it's a different mechanism, but the basic force of people in either commodity or differentiated product markets going after superior returns, as long as you can't keep them out, those returns are going to your cost of capital. You're going to a competitive market. Yes.
Would you argue that they haven't successfully differentiated them? So Cadillac, for example,
I think that's the wrong argument. A Cadillac is different than Mercedes-Benz. It really is a different product. Go to a Mercedes-Benz dealer, ask for an SL50, and see how you feel when he drives out with a Cadillac Escalade. Okay, there's no question these are different products. The point is, though, that if they have equal access to the same basic market, they're going to enter that market until they eliminate the profitability for every one of those products. So the profit of the Escalade is just offset, because when you charge a high price, by the cost of the design and the advertising and so on. Is that clear?
I mean, fixed costs are not changing here, essentially, of product development, marketing. Your share is going down, so your cost per unit is going up. You have a different product, as Bruce is saying, in the sense that you're facing a downward slope in the demand curve, but you have to keep at it. You have to keep marketing, building your brand, protecting it, of course. And that's what is increasing your average cost per unit, because the entrants are taking a chunk of the market away from you. Of course, that's the logic of competition, that either one or the other.
If they're not, that's right. If that's what you mean by a commodity product, that there's some substitutability.
Yeah.
But that's not what people mean by commodity product. You will, at some price, substitute a Ferrari for that Mercedes-Benz, even if Ferrari is your idea of Italian crack. At $200, you'll buy the Ferrari. Is that it? So there is substitution.
Okay, very good.
Not that Ferraris are Italian crack.
So again, just to emphasize, okay, product differentiation is no free lunch. That's essentially the idea. I think that's what we're talking about. That you have to take into account the fact that building that demand curve for you, building that kind of downward slope in demand curve is no free lunch. Okay, and the same efficiency argument that works for production in a commodity business works for actually developing brand names. Okay, it's the same type of efficiency. You have to be efficient at product development, marketing, and so on and so forth. The same idea of efficiency. Okay? And there are a lot of firms out there that built brand names and that eventually went down because they were not efficient in actually protecting that brand name. So in terms of efficiency, commodity business is all about controlling production costs. Think of it that way. Whereas, when you are differentiating your product, it's more than about just controlling this production cost, how well you can make whatever it is that you're selling in the market, but also all the costs associated with actually marketing what you're producing. So you have to be efficient at two things, so to speak. Think of it that way. Okay, think of it that way. Building whatever it is that you're selling and building a brand name for whatever it is that you're selling. Very good.
No, well, only in the sense that in the commodity business, you just have to manage costs. In these differentiated product businesses, you have to manage cost and revenue.
But is that quantifiable? How
Yeah,
much
it's
you
two
have?
instead of one.
I mean, you can look at them.
But beyond that, yes.
Maybe you can look at marketing cost and you can look at marketing cost, advertising, all these things. So you can quantify how much does it cost you to actually, absolutely.
I mean, that's a snide answer, but you understand.
No, I know.
You guys have to put up with these answers twice a week. I put up with them on a daily basis, you know. You think that's humiliating? Just imagine my life on a daily basis.
Trust me, he gives as good as he gets.
Okay. Now, one thing that you can think is about this first mover advantage. Okay, and this is an important issue to which you know, you can talk a lot about this. Let me just make a simple point. You want to ask yourself whether first mover advantage is a source of long-run profitability. And let's just look at some of the evidence. There you have some of the first movers in particular segments of the industry, okay? And look at the dominant competitors today. It's not that every one of those early movers are not around, but many of them are gone, okay? So, you know, I'm going to tell you a little bit about VisiCalc. But anyway, you have a lot of the search engines. Alta Vista, Google is the dominant competitor right now. NBC, an early TV network with a dominant position until quite recently. Not anymore, as it's been widely documented. For the first company in the world that was able to essentially mass produce an item. Okay, a phenomenal achievement of American management, by the way. Will not anymore the dominant firm in the industry by a long stretch. Okay, many imitators. GM came to dominate later on the Japanese automakers and so on and so forth. An exception, eBay, when it comes to online auctions, not actions, auctions. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how quickly this can change, for those of you who are devotees of software history, there was a spreadsheet that was the first one introduced, which was VisiCalc, which was developed, as many other things related to technology in MIT by two nerds who were taking an accounting class of all things and realized that they could design a package, do a lot of the things that the accounting professor was explaining. Okay, so they actually went. By the way, they never patented. They went to ask whether you could patent software. The answer to that was no. By the lawyers, by the way, they told them that they couldn't see an argument why software was patentable. But anyway, they founded the firm. It actually sold a product that you can still download as a curiosity from the web. Very soon, entrance came about because everybody realized the value of the invention, SuperCalc, in 1980. Look at how quickly people came in. Okay, how quickly people came in. Microsoft's Multiplan, then Lotus 123, which is the first one I remember. Apple Works, and then finally Microsoft Excel, which was first introduced for the Mac in 85, and then for Windows 2.0 in 1987. Okay. Now, a couple of considerations for first movers, and why is it that a first mover is never a source of sustained competitive advantage? You have some uncertainty with demand. Look, the first mover does the market research for everyone else. This is one of the things that, in a way you provide, in the language of an economist, always an obscure language, you provide an externality to others. You don't know what people want, but I go first and I market my product. You immediately get a natural experiment. I sell my product, customers react, they may not buy the product, now you know that you got it wrong, or they may tell you directly, actually. Firms conduct all the time surveys with their customers to understand essentially what is that they like and don't like of their product, what kind of attributes you would like to actually have enhanced and which ones you would like to have eliminated. And it's very difficult to keep that information for yourself. Okay? By then you have suffered the cost of marketing the first version, the first product, okay? And everyone else is benefiting from this, okay? Now, in the case of VisiCalc, basically these guys had the understanding that they thought, well, what I'm going to do is build a lot of flexibility in the program. I'm going to let the customers of the software do a lot of things, program the formulas. Now, they thought that this flexibility was going to be of great value to the customers they thought they were going to have once they sold this. But the result is that it was very difficult to use. Very few people could use it, okay? What happened with the entrants is that they learned from this experience, and then they started giving their customers with a new product a more prepackaged experience, like the one we have today with Excel, where even if you were to want to calculate a moving average, you just go to Excel, and there's a little function that does it for you. It does a phenomenal array of things for you. You don't need to program anything. There's so many prepackaged functions in the program, and that seems what customers wanted from a spreadsheet, effectively. Okay? Now, a second point is that customers are still not affiliated by the nature of a new market. There's no customer loyalty. That's the whole thing. People are learning. I don't know what is that I like. I don't know what is that I'm supposed to be loyal to. So in that sense, you don't have all these things that can help an incumbent in an existing market retain its dominant position in that market. You just don't have that. That's the whole point of a new market. Okay? And it's very difficult to keep competitors out. Okay? If it's a very profitable business, like the spreadsheet business was, then it's going to be very difficult to actually avoid entry by software competitors. Okay? There's another anecdote, by the way, that sometimes, innovations occur. This is kind of an interesting story. Innovations occur in the least likely of places. Places that actually don't have the competencies to develop the innovation itself. The most famous example is the CT scanner. Okay? Does anyone know where the CT scanner was developed, was invented? EMI, okay, which, as you know, mostly is a record company. Okay? And, so it was developed by in the EMI labs, where there were two geniuses that came up with the idea of the CT scanner. They were given the Nobel Prize, by the way, for that invention. But of course, EMI was not the right industry, not the right firm to develop this. They tried, they failed miserably, and of course it went to be dominated by RCA, GE, and all these other companies. Okay? So that's the other thing. Sometimes, innovations occur in random firms, so to speak, just because you happen to have this genius as a researcher, that you put in a cubicle and you forgot about him, and the guy came up with a brilliant idea, and now you don't know what to do with it. You try to develop it because it's not that the EMI management didn't understand the value of the innovation, but they just didn't have the assets that were needed to actually market, develop, make money out of that product. Okay, a product that has become an essential product for medical services. Okay. So, ain't going to work. First mover advantage, not a good idea. Okay? Not a good idea, typically. Now, barriers to entry are a totally different ballgame. They are the heart of a firm's strategy, and they are a definite source of value. Okay? Now, I want to distinguish from the very beginning barriers to entry from whatever skills and competences you think the firm has. In principle, you can have, exceptional talent working for you. You can have very good managers, but this can be hired away. They can be replicated. Okay, even organizational practices are very easy. I wouldn't say easy, but they can be replicated in principle by a process of imitation, typically. Okay? So I want you to distinguish between barriers to entry, which allows incumbents to do things that potential entrants cannot do. That's the key. The key is that a barrier to entry allows me to do things that even if you were to enter and compete with me in the same industry, I can do things that you cannot do. Okay? In particular, this something will allow me to undercut you every time you try to steal some share of the market away from me. We want to understand what are the sources of those barriers to entry, because as we just said in the first bullet point, these are really the sources of value that we want to focus on. Okay? Any questions about this? Very good. Now, a word on terminology, just to be clear. Barriers to entry are incumbent competitive advantages. Okay, that's one way you can think about this. Entrant competitive advantages is basically the edge that a new firm has because it has the latest technology available to produce whatever it is that they're selling, or they have the hottest product. In a way, they are transitory in nature. Okay, you can actually have very nice earnings for a while, but those earnings are going to erode by the relentless process of competition. So whatever I'm going to be talking about in the next few minutes, whenever I refer to barriers to entry, what I mean is incumbent competitive advantages. Okay? Very good. So let's look carefully at the sources of barriers to entry. Okay? And you can think of these as being divided in three. Supply, something about the technology that I have that allows me to do things better than anyone else. Demand, for whatever reason I have access to a customer base, I have some type of loyalty from my customers, and some economies of scale. Okay? And we're going to see this in turn. Well, supply advantages, I've just said, it refers to the superior technology that you have, either because you have some patents, okay? But this cannot be a sustained source of superior profitability. Patents, after all, expire. Second, technological change, progress, renders the patents obsolete. There are many ways to circumvent patents. That's the other thing. The most valuable of them are processes, okay, that can be patented as well, but many of them are such common sense processes, and even though they may be phenomenal sources of value, and even though they may be patented, they can be very easily imitated, okay? Just simply because they have this common sense attribute to them. So, in that sense, the superior technology may not be a sustained source of excess profits. Now, one thing that can be is whether you have some privileged access to some input. Okay, you are monopolies and you're given the rights to exploit a particular raw material, or cheap capital provided by a pocket willing to lose money because for some reason they are willing to subsidize the development and production of a particular product. Can anyone give me an example of this? Any European here? We do these things in Europe all the time. This is what we do in Europe. We are subsidized. The Airbus. Okay, it's a very good example. Okay, it's the most, it just loses money left and right. But we're incredibly proud of this development that we somehow can make machines that fly in Europe too. And, we're happy to compete with the Americans on this. Okay? So that's another source, you can have. So we have nothing to say about stupidity, by the way. I don't think we don't have a good academic understanding of stupidity, but so in that sense, I don't have anything intelligent to say about that. So there you have a little bit there you have the average cost of the incumbent. Okay, this is the technological superiority that it has over everyone else. Okay, he's facing a downward sloping demand curve. You can actually put up with an entrant that is making zero profits, and you're making the strictly positive profits on account of the difference between the price now rightly on the demand function and your average cost. Okay. Okay. So notice that the entrant makes no economic profit. In principle, we have low return on equity. Entry or no entry, this is something that in equilibrium is not determined. The incumbent will benefit from high return on equity and a large economic profit. Okay? And again, the sources of this barrier to entry based on supply factors can be some proprietary technology, some privileged access to resources, some learning curve, and we're going to go back to the issue of the learning curve in a moment because it's a form of economies of scale. Okay. Any questions about this? Any questions?
So, just to repeat, one way to protect that market in differentiated products from those entrants is basically to be in a position where they can't match my cost structure. And if they can't match my cost structure, I can either charge prices to keep them out, or if I let them in like this, I still make money. So that competitive advantage by an incumbent means that in these markets you're going to make money.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that is a possible source of superior long-term returns.
Okay. Yep. Very good. So there you have some examples, like Kodak and Polaroid in film. They had technologies that were proprietary. Alcoa and DuPont in many processes that allowed them to actually have superior technology that was a source of extraordinary profits for long periods of time, and then the cheap capital that we were talking about before. Okay? There are many examples of this. No wonder patents are a source of profit. They can be very valuable, and they can be a sustained source of profit. Okay? You can build on them because they expire after one. Well, let's look at a second source of barrier to entry, which are demand-based. Okay? So in this case, what happens is that the incumbent has access to a potential customer pool that the entrant cannot match. Okay? So I just basically can sell things to a particular customer base, and I know that no one else can. Okay? And specifically, it may be the case that the base is captive. Okay? And a firm likes nothing more than a loyal customer base. This is actually quite a phenomenal source of value, and we're going to see a lot of examples of this. Okay? Now, you want to understand what are the sources of captivity, because this will tell you how stable these sources are of competitive advantage. Well, one possibility is habit. switching cost, or search cost. So let's go over each of them in turn. So any type of addiction, such as cigarettes, okay, will give you a captive customer base. Okay. And typically, I'm not a smoker, but I'm told that smokers find it very difficult to actually shop across brands. Okay, they typically like a Marlboro's or whatever is that cigarette brand is that they buy. Okay? So that, of course, gives you immediately a source of market power. Okay, precisely because you know that you have an addicted customer base that needs your product in order to breathe, essentially. Okay. But, other things like, less addictive, like Coke and Pepsi, are very similar. People are Coke people or Pepsi people. I'm a Coke person. Okay? And, you go to a bar, you always ask for a Coke. And if they don't have Coke, you may actually end up buying something else. Okay? A different drink, an orange juice or something. Bottle of water, something like this. Okay? Now, for whatever reason that people don't understand, at least I don't understand well, this doesn't happen with beer. I'm not a beer drinker. Okay, but I'm always struck by the fact that even though people may like a particular beer at home, whenever they go to a Chinese restaurant, they buy a Chinese beer. Whenever they go to a Mexican restaurant, they buy a Mexican beer, and so on and so forth. Even though the equivalent American product that they're used to is also sold in the restaurant. But they're happy to experiment. They seem to have less stickiness, whatever that beer gives to people, they seem to have less stickiness, which I've never understood. Is that
I think that's fair. Ask them how many of them order Chinese or Japanese or Mexican cola.
Is there such a thing as Mexican cola? Is it Chinese?
It's just they just don't drink different things for cola and they try different things. Just like vodka, or whatever it's called.
Yeah. Yeah. So there must be some physiology to this, right? Or something about the taste buds that I don't know if does anybody know? Is there a Chinese cola? Is there like a Mao cola or something like this? There is? Huh? Ginger cola. Ginger cola. Okay. Huh? What's the name again? Inca Cola. That's a gorgeous name. I mean, I would buy that cola actually, just for the El Kilo. Yellow. Yellow cola. Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. And then there's I've just said that there's a Chinese cola, right? I don't know how popular it is. Okay, so there are some local varieties of colas. Good luck in trying them. But if you can bring me a bottle of Inca Cola, you'll get an A++ in this class. I'm not sure. Okay, just for the switching costs. Okay, now think about software. I mean, we all know this. Okay, how painful it is actually to switch from one program that you're used to another. Okay, think about an operating system. Okay. Many customers are reluctant to change their operating system. We hear all the time the many wonders of the Mac, and we'll go back to this example in a moment. But, when it comes to software, this is not what made the Mac so popular. We'll go back to this in a second. Okay. So, high fixed cost of learning a product are typically a very good barrier to entry, okay, because it gives you the captive customer base. Any type of network effect, okay, so software has typically a lot of network externalities. An operating system where a lot of applications have to run in the operating system. You have to exchange packages with your customers, with your coworkers, with your stakeholders in general of the production process. This immediately generates network effects that lock in products, giving customers a very strong incentive not to switch products. Once you have that, you have the stickiness in the customer base that is a source of superior profit. Search costs. Some services, like a specialized insurance, is actually, involves very high search costs. So not auto insurance, for instance. Don't think about auto insurance. But if you own a house and you're trying to buy home insurance, and I have, you realize how difficult is actually the search process. Once you actually find an insurer that is willing to insure your house, they will get to know exactly where the house is, who you are, how you take care of the house. It's actually very costly to actually move out. Okay, they immediately gain a kind of monopoly power on you. It's just simply because I don't want to go again through the painful process of spending 6 months calling insurers to see who would be willing to insure my house in Long Island. Okay, one of the most painful experiences I've been through in my life. Okay, but I learned a lot about the home insurance business that I can tell you about one day if you want to. Not to mention if you're actually picky about the home insurance company that you want, if you want to have a minimum credit rating for that insurance company. And that's just a nightmare in itself. Okay? So let's go over them again. Habits, any type of addiction. If you can make your customers into junkies for your product, go for it. That seems like a very good source of profit. Switching costs, whenever you can develop either high learning cost for your product, or you can develop some type of network externality, as it's called more technically, for your product immediately, whether you can build all these applications around your product that lock in customers. That's a very good source of superior profits. By the way, I failed to mention professional services, and this is very intuitive. Professional services work exactly the same way, right? And it's very rare that you want to change your lawyer. Your lawyer knows you well, knows the type of problems that you get into. He has a lot of, specialized knowledge about you. You don't change lawyer every single day. You build some trust. It eases communication. It allows you to communicate with your lawyer in a very succinct and efficient way, and so on and so forth. Okay? You trust each other. You trust what decisions that you're going to be making. That you're telling him the truth. That he's telling you the truth, and so on and so forth. Okay? Your doctor's the same way. You feel comfortable with a doctor, you're immediately locked in. Okay. And finally, search cost. So there you have it. Okay? You have the same type of technology in this case. Now notice that now both the incumbent and the entrant have exactly the same average cost technology. The dark blue line there. But the demand function for the incumbent is slightly different than the demand function of the entrant. It's everywhere above the demand function for the entrant. Okay? So for the entrant there will be no economic, the same thing as always. There will be no economic profit. Notice that the guy is here at 0. Price equals average cost. Profit per unit is equal to 0. Okay, whereas the price is up there, So what about the incumbent is making economic profit, has high return on equity, higher sales, and so on and so forth. Any questions about this?
You got a question?
I have a question slightly different than habit. Can a well-developed brand, and I'm not even talking about a differentiated product, I'm thinking, for example, about luxury clothing, be a source of, be a barrier to entry? So, for example, if I go and buy like a tie to give as a present, I'm going to look at a Ferragamo tie, and that's going to send a certain signal to the receiver. And an equal quality tie that doesn't have that kind of brand built into it, I probably won't buy because it's not going to. Well, I don't know. Depending on.
I see all these things, particularly given the number of luxury brands. I mean, Hermes, Ferragamo, Dior, you name it. I mean, I see exactly that as product differentiation. I can put, and it goes a little bit back to the question that someone was asking before about whether I can tell the difference between a Cadillac and a BMW. But if you put in front of me a tie from Ferragamo, a tie from Valentino, a tie from Dior, I'm running out of names, but I'm sure that many of them are there. You won't be. I mean, I won't be able to tell them apart, particularly if I'm, if I'm not buying for myself. I can believe that there's some type of product differentiation there that lowers the share that each of them is going to be selling. But I don't believe that you can make in such a commodity business as ties. I don't know.
The crucial thing about brand is brand loyalty. And it serves two functions. One is it keeps you going back to that store, which means that store has a base of customers. So if you always buy the Hermes tie, the Buffett example is if you always buy the Seas candy, and you don't want to take the risk of giving your wife a non-Hermes tie because that's what she wants, depending on what she's like. Then you are brand loyal, and that's what's crucial. The other thing that brand loyalty does is it keeps you out of the entrance market. So you're not available when, Mao ties or Inca ties suddenly come into the United States with their product to buy from them to enable their entry. eventually, high-end products, you want to do variety. You want to do the latest thing. You like to try out the Hermes store if you've just been at the Ferragamo store. So you typically don't have a lot of brand loyalty, which is what you see. Okay?
Yeah, there are so many Hermes scarves that I can give my wife. Now I'm running down the list, so yeah, I think that's problematic actually to go back time and over again. Going back to the physiology of this, have you been to see Buffett this year or not? Warren Buffett, not yet?
No,
They're not going to go? What a pity.
there's some of them.
There's some of it. Because, I mean,
That's the next class.
because one of the things that Warren Buffett always tells is precisely about the physiology of drinking Coke, which, he writes a lot about as well. That you drink the first Coke and then you drink another one like in Bill Clinton type, and the 10th one tastes exactly the same as the first one. There's a very fast depreciation in the taste buds.
Beer on the 10th one, you hit yourself in the middle of the
Exactly. Exactly. So that's the beauty of Coke, right? That it depreciates very fast. You like it. Your taste buds like it better than Pepsi. It depreciates very fast. After 2 hours, you want another one. After 2 hours, you want another one, and so on and so forth. And it will taste exactly the same at the end of the day than at the beginning. What a wonderful product. Okay. Very well. So now we're going to go to another important barrier to entry. And here I don't resist the temptation of actually just showing you two expressions, okay? Which is economies of scale. Okay, so think for a moment of a cost function that has a component that is a fixed cost, okay, and some variable cost, okay, represented by this parameter A times the number of units that you're going to be producing. So notice that as I take the amount of what I produce to infinity, as I make it very, very large, the average cost is going down. It's converging to this fixed number equal to A, the variable cost. Okay. Whenever we have that situation, we say there are economies of scale. By becoming large, I lower the average cost. Okay? So the average cost is decreasing in the amount that I'm going to be producing. So the idea is that if a firm can become sufficiently large, can become, of a certain initial size, then by virtue of these economies of scale, it can become technologically more efficient in the sense that it has a lower average cost, and thus gain an effective barrier to entry. We're going to go back a little bit more formally to this idea. So if you want to sustain, okay, it requires a temporary demand advantage, okay? It requires something more than this, by the way, in order to be an effective, I'll write this down in the slide because I forgot an important bullet point. It requires some type of customer stickiness too. Okay, and I'll go back to this point in a moment. It requires some type of customer stickiness. Okay? Very important, economies of scale depend on the relative size. It's how big you are relative to your competitors more than how big you are as an absolute measure. Okay, so it's something about what bigger share do I have of this market relative to the next guy that I'm competing with. Don't think about absolute size. This is not relevant for our discussion. Okay? So think for a moment about a situation where you have this economy of scale, where there you have the demand for the incumbent and the entrant. There's no demand stickiness. Okay, there's no customer stickiness. So the fact that I think about me moving first, I build this phenomenal production capacity, but somehow my customers are not loyal to me. Well, the entrant can come, match my production capacity, and the demand will be more or less evenly split. Okay? If there's no customer loyalty or stickiness, so to speak, then you should be expecting more or less the share in this market to be split between the two competitors in the industry. Now, instead, if there's some form of customer stickiness, then this is the situation more or less that we have. Okay? There you have the price, there you have the demand of the incumbent, the demand of the entrant, and there's a lot of stickiness. My customers are incredibly loyal to me. They don't want to leave me for whatever reason. They like my product more than any other alternative that they can picture. Were you to come in, you would be realizing some profits because your demand would be very low. So there you have. You come in as an entrant. You thought that there was less stickiness than there actually is. You realize some losses. My customers don't leave me. I'm making some hefty profits. Okay, but notice what this requires. It requires the combination of some type of economies of scale together with some type of customer stickiness or loyalty, some type of customer captivity that prevents people from moving from here to there, because if not, you end up in the plot that we had before. Okay? We had before. So again, in order to have economies of scale to be an effective barrier to entry, it's not enough just to have this decreasing shape for the average cost, okay, that the costs per unit are decreasing in the size of your production. You need to have some type of customer capacity. Your customers will not abandon where you to enter and build the same capacity, because if there's no customer capacity, you should be expecting that more or less you will split whatever market is there out there between the two of you. Okay?
And the perfect example of that is automobiles. Yeah. When you go to buy a luxury car, you like to look at all the luxury cars. It's actually a privilege to search because you get to test drive them. You certainly don't buy out of heaven. So it's impossible for companies to defend their superior share. So even though there are big fixed costs and you have that downward sloping cost curve, if you cannot protect a greater share of the market like the car companies can, because they don't have the customer loyalty, then people are going to enter, they're going to divide up the market equally, more or less, they're going to be competing on equal terms, and they're going to compete with profit sources. And that's true, by the way, of all those big name brands. It applies to appliances, where people buy things infrequently, even though they're prestige brands and there are lots of them. It applies to fashion goods. It applies to things like vacuum cleaners, where Uber is synonymous with a vacuum cleaner. So if you can't defend that share, you're not going to be able to get it in the long run.
Yeah. So that's exactly like what I was saying there before. That in a way, that's the history of the U.S. car market. Okay. So 3 points to finish this economies of scale as barrier to entries. Oops. As Bruce was just saying, advantage of the economies of scale must be defended. Okay. The source of competitive advantage is the share of the company. The share of the company has of the overall market, not the market size. And look, a trivial comment, but it's very profound. Growth in the market is the enemy of a competitive advantage based on economies of scale. Because other things equal, it makes you smaller. What matters is the size of the market. Okay? So if I don't reinvest in order to preserve the economies of scale, the market will run away from me. So growth, another component to take into account when understanding whether the economies of scale is a sustainable source of competitive advantage. Okay? Any questions about this before we move on into... Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, a company like Walmart, do they have any customer loyalty, or I can't see other than scale what advantages they might have.
Think about it in your shopping habits. If the prices at Walmart were the same as the prices at Kmart, and you were going to Walmart in one town, you see it, where are you likely to be? I'll tell you, we actually know this. For standalone stores, there's very substantial customer loyalty. For mall stores that are not the anchor stores in a mall, so they're not at one end of the mall, or the other where there's a lot of traffic moving by, there's almost none. For products you buy infrequently, so hardware, you tend to go back to the same store because you're used to where the selection is and you're used to knowing you're going to get there. For things that you buy, and like fashion, there's almost no company. And you see, by the way, that in the patterns, again, of why the fashion goods stores like Gap and Liz Claiborne are not so profitable as brands, even though they're much better brands than Target and Walmart. And it's the Targets and the Walmarts and the Home Depots and the Lowe's that are much more. So that's a very good question. But in fact, because Walmart stores tend to be standalone, because people get used to going there, there's enough customer captivity, so given the economies of scale, they can protect them. Now, the other thing about this, too, is that when Tano says it's the size of the market, remember, it's the size of the market that determines your fixed cost that's important. So it's the region within which the stores are located. Because because the fixed cost is large relative to the size of that market, an entrant competing with Walmart isn't going to survive on 10% share. He's going to have to get probably 20, 25% share to justify the warehouses, distribution, and the stores. So that's why the smaller the market, the easier it is to defend, because an entrant has a bigger break-even share that they have to make. The global automobile market, you can be viable in a 2 to 3% share. Nobody is going to ever keep anybody below 2 to 3% share. So there is, the answer to your question is there is some. It's not strong, but given the nature of those geographic markets, it's enough.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of broad statement that the growth is the enemy of competitive advantage. I mean, I'm thinking about industries like, I don't know, EMC, network storage. If they have a high cash flow, they produce a lot of cash flow, then they have a lot of cash to invest in the industry, and so they get actually more economies of scale rather than other people. And if they don't have any more growth, they have
It's a matter of whether you think the business that we're talking about has a substantial large fixed cost or not. It goes back to the issue of whether you have a global market or not. Growth can be a very good thing. That's not the statement. Growth can be a wonderful thing for a company. The question is whether it can erode your competitive advantage if you don't do any additional investment. That's the statement. Look at the way you post it. Hey, I'm growing and I'm reinvesting in order to keep it. That's perfectly fine. And you may be able to sustain economies of scale if you keep growing as the market is growing with you. Okay.
And let's put it this way. Suppose the cost of producing the storage devices is fixed. The development cost is roughly fixed itself. The cost of building the factory is fixed. If the market is sort of $1 billion, an entrant has to be able to get $250 million in sales to be viable in that market. It's got to get 25% share. It's easy for an incumbent to stop and get it. If the market grows by
10 billion.
so now it's not $1 billion market, it's a $5 billion. And the entrant still needs only $250 billion in sales to enter that market. Now, the entrant only needs 250 out of 5 billion, and that's hard to stop.
So you're going to have
You
all...
have lots of those entrants
Exactly.
eating you alive. That's the sense in which bigger markets are harder to defend. And that growth occurs through globalization in certain product markets, although not for services, and just in the ordinary growth of the economy. Why do you think it's hard to dominate Chinese retail markets? Because their idea of a small town is 2.5 million people. And that will support lots of stores. So it's hard for one Walmart supercenter or 6 Walmart supercenters to defend it. Is that clear?
It's just a matter of percentages. It depends on the size of the market. If you want just to build a plan that as Bruce, I'm just going to repeat what Bruce said, that costs $200 million. Well, it's very different if it's a market of $200 million or it's a market of $2 billion. No?
No, it's good. It's just I was wondering which kind of company in the growth market doesn't more invest. So that's why.
We will talk about this. There are good things about growth.
Yeah.
But when your market gets really big, it gets a lot harder to defend.
Right.
So what markets you want are markets that are local, where you're always big in size relative to the size of the market.
You're thinking like an economist, which is a very good thing, which is growth is a very good thing. But think about from the perspective of an entrepreneur who's thinking about protecting its profits. That's the thing.
From entry.
You see, these are the difference. Absolutely. Very good. So just to, let's move. So other sources of barriers to entry, well, obviously government privileges, licenses, monopoly concessions, and so on and so forth. Informational advantages, which are sort of a demand competitive advantage. Whenever the firm knows some customer attributes on account of their purchases that is difficult for others to acquire. Whenever you know something on account of your activities, And Bruce was telling me this example right before class that I don't resist the temptation of, because I actually think it's very relevant. Wachovia apparently was in the business of making all these tobacco loans. It's originally it's a North Carolina bank. So they had a lot of expertise, I guess, because they grew out of farming loans, I assume. Okay, let me assume. And they were giving all these tobacco loans, which are very informationally intensive. You need to know which farmer is having which crop and so on and so forth. Deutsche Bank, but these are very profitable loans, by the way. Deutsche Bank at some point decided to enter and compete with Wachovia in this market. But of course, the superior knowledge of Wachovia made Deutsche Bank subject to a very standard problem when it comes to these informationally sensitive products, which is what we refer to as adverse selection. That you get stuck with the risks that Wachovia doesn't want. And if Wachovia doesn't want those risks, well, you know that those are the bad risks. Okay? Deutsche Bank somehow thought they could get around this problem, but of course, they ended up doing not much in this market. Is that a fair...
Yeah, I mean, and think about it simply. So, if there's a tobacco farmer or a tobacco warehouse owner, and he's a Wachovia customer because they own just about 100% of that market. And Deutsche Bank comes in and makes an offer at an interest rate that's below the Wachovia interest rate. They say, we can still make money on that interest rate. Well, if that loan at the lower interest rate, given the probability of default, is still profitable, what is Wachovia going to do? They're going to match the Deutsche Bank interest rate. And who wants to switch if they get the same interest? So they're going to keep those guys for all the time. If the guy is a bad risk, and Wachovia knows it, and Deutsche Bank doesn't because it's not as well informed, what's Wachovia going to do? They're going to say, we're really sorry, that's a great rate. We suggest you take it. And Deutsche Bank wound up with every crappy risk in North Carolina and lost their shirts. Now, where this applies is obviously in financial markets, and there is a version of this that is the heart of what we talked about with value investing. If you are on the other side of a competitive situation in making loans or making investments with somebody who is better informed than you are, and you win that auction or win that loan, watch out. Okay, so especially in financial markets, superior information matters a lot.
Yeah.
Does somebody have a question?
I was just going to say, this actually just sounds like a first mover advantage. Because if Deutsche had been the first one there, presumably they had access to the same information.
Again, it's not first movers. It's first movers when the market first opens up. So suppose Walter Raleigh had discovered tobacco, and all of a sudden Wachovia got in and started making tobacco loans. There would still be enough new tobacco farmers for Deutsche Bank to get in the game. It's when the market is stabilized and there are not a lot of new people coming in and people have established relationships and established customers, that's when big share matters. That's when the information advantages matter. So the problem with first mover is it's almost always in nascent markets, where the market hasn't settled down, where nobody has the dominant information. Is that clear? Because that's an important thing.
Okay, let's move on a little bit. So let's do a little bit of strategic analysis, and let's see how we can actually start looking at these competitive advantages in a more organized way. So we propose a particular protocol to understand a little bit whether we're looking at a firm with a particular competitive advantage. So the first thing is to have a good understanding of the industry, okay, to have an industry map, okay. Second thing is that you want to understand to what extent barriers to entry exist in this industry, okay, and for this, of course, it's very useful to understand the industry history. So just going back and understanding what went on in this particular industry is absolutely of the essence, and if you identify these competitive advantages, what are they, okay? And second, you want to understand whether anything has changed. What is the future going to look like the past? What is the future strategy and profitability of the current firms in this industry that may have some competitive advantages that you may want to actually build on, but you want to understand to what extent they are stable, they're going to be there when you decide to invest, and so on and so forth. Okay? So everything that we've discussed so far is basically about understanding the different forms of competitive advantages that you can have in any industry. Supply, demand, economies of scale. Okay? Very good. So a fun example is this one, okay? The example of Apple. Okay, so there you have So of an industry map, you have the chips, the hardware, the software, the networks, and the components, everything that is a peripheral, whether it's a monitor, the power supplies, the printers, and so on and so forth. Okay. And we've listed, the collection of firms that kind of dominate each of the segments. Okay. So that you have in the chips market, you have Intel, Advanced Micro Device, Motorola, Apple, hardware, a long list, Dell, HP, Gateway, IBM, Compaq, Apple, Lenovo, you name it. Okay, and that already tells you a lot. That already tells you that that's hardware is kind of a business where entry seems to happen all the time. Where there are going to be a lot of firms, or there are going to be a lot of rotation among the top sellers in that segment. We'll go back to that.
When you go to actually do this, to ask if there is a competitive advantage here, every management you meet with will tell you they have a competitive advantage. If it is a confusing industry structure with lots of segments, they will do a bait and switch on it. They will tell you, here, look, in this particular segment, we have a competitive advantage. Steve Jobs, in the case of Apple, is a genius, and we produce the best products, and that gives us a competitive advantage. The way to get around that kind of situation is to always start off with a good idea of what the constituent elements of the industry are, what the individual competitive sectors are. And that's what an industry map does for you. And it's like drawing any map. You're going to draw it broadly at first, and then if you want to refine the analysis, you're going to do it in more detail. The way to do that is, again, don't jump to the financials. You jump to the financials, they'll kill you all day long. I mean, the investment bankers are good at manipulating people. What you want to start with is literally just a list of potential segments. Just start with the top line there. And don't do more than 5. Because you can always go back and do subsegments under them. And if you do more than 5, you're going to get bogged down. So start with, and the segments that Tano has started with are chips, hardware, software, and we know there are a lot of subsectors of software.
Right.
Just start there, because Apple's in all of those. And you could do networks and components. And there are lots of different components. There are memory chips, there are monitors, there are power supplies,
Printers,
there are printers, and so on. Just start with the list. Don't do anything else, because if you don't have a clear picture, the analysis can get really confused. Then again, before you look at a number, for each segment, start listing the names of companies, starting with the dominant competitors. So that if you look at CPU chips, and you start with Intel, obviously, and you've got AMD, and you've got other semiconductor companies, just list them. For hardware, Dell, Compaq, and so on. Just do a list. For software, it's Microsoft and Apple is, of course, in all of these. When you get to components, what are you typically going to see when you start to do that? Just the list of names. You're going to have a lot of no-name companies whose identities change all the time. Does that tell you something, except in printers, about the structure of that industry? Right away it does. It says there's no dominant competitor
exactly right. So anyway, so there you have it, the segment leaders for these three. Well, let's build on what Bruce just said. For Intel, for chips is Intel, of course. Hardware, you have a long list, and we're going to look at the share stability in a moment. For software, you have Microsoft, and the critical question is this issue of share stability that Bruce was mentioning. Do market shares vary a lot? As the dominant competitor change, is there significant entry? And an example of this, let's look at the hardware industry. There you have the four top sellers of hardware, of the computers themselves in 1990. So you have the first column refers to the share they have of the overall market, and the second one, where it says share, is normalizing, so they are up to 100. I'm only reporting the top four. Notice that Compaq had once normalized 39, IBM 25, Apple 31, and Dell 6. Okay, what happened in 1998? Well, in 1980, there was a big change. Notice that now Compaq has exactly the same share, but IBM went down from 25 to 16. Apple went from 31 to 18. Dell went from 6 to 26. So when you actually compute the change, you have big numbers. On the last column on the right, you have 0 for the case of Compaq, 9 for the case of IBM, 13 for the case of Apple, 20 for the case of Dell, an average of 10.5, and more or less the cutoff should be something like 3, you said.
Below 3% in share change, it's probably got really stable shares, a fair amount of customer captivity, significant barriers to entry. If you're above 5, you can forget the barriers to entry.
Exactly. So that's, someone was asking about quantitatively whether you can actually look at these issues. Of course you can. You can actually look at whether, there's a lot of turnover at the top. That tells you something about this.
But
okay.
Again, remember the game here is to collect and integrate all the information as effectively as possible. So this tells one story about hardware, just the PCs themselves.
Right.
If you look at the identity of the dominant competitor, who was the first dominant competitor in PCs? It was Apple. How long did they last? About 2 years. Who were they displaced by? IBM. How long did they last? About 3 years, 4 years maybe. Who were they displaced by? Compaq. They were displaced by Dell. Lately they've come back. So the story of the relatively short-lived dominance of competitors reinforces this view. Third, are there big, and this is the third thing Connor mentioned, are there big entrants who've successfully entered and become large? Dell, Gateway, Lenovo, Sony, it's a long list. What does all that history tell you consistently about barriers to entry? So you've got the quantification, you've got the history of entry and the history. There just probably are not any. What about if you go through the same exercise for CPU chips? In 1981-82, who were the dominant CPU chip maker? Intel. In 1995, who was? In 1985, Intel. 1990, Intel. 1990, Intel. 2000, Intel. In 2002, everybody got excited because they thought, AMD is going to kill them. Today, who's the dominant CPU chip maker? Intel. It's a very different story. You get share stability between them and AMD. The average change of the top 4, there's not much of the, beyond the top 2, would be about 2 to 3% at most. Have there been any big entrants into the CPU chip business? IBM tried and failed. The Japanese tried and failed. Motorola got wiped out. National Semiconductor tried and failed. Texas Instruments got wiped out. It's not the history of lots of big entrants. So again, you have a consistent story. When you look at system software, what's your sense of that, Mark? Microsoft, as much as you hate them. The second, by the way, indicator that you want is not just these barriers to entry directly observed, but that people can make money off them. That it's not just that people are staying out because it's a capital business. So you also want to look at profitability. Profitability profitability for Intel has been about 20% return on invested capital for a really long time. It hasn't eroded, it's been high, and it's stayed there. Again, that suggests, because people should want to get in, that there are barriers in. For Microsoft, it's even better than that. They were reporting around this time in 1999, when we did this, an average of a 30% return on capital. But they had two businesses. One business in which they had $40 billion invested, earned 3% after tax, maybe. It was called cash in the bank. And the other business in which they had $10 billion invested was earning 150 to 200% a year, and that was called software. So again, you see high, stable, sustainable margins. Margins fluctuate much more, and they're manipulated much more in accounting terms by the PC manufacturers. So if you look at the bottom line story about these segments, you have a history of entry, a history of changeover in the dominant competitor, and at best, moderate average returns that are and unstable shares in hardware. What does that suggest about competitive advantages, barriers to entry there? They're fairly limited. But what about the other two segments?
What do you want to see, Bruce?
Just that it's stable, high return, low history of entry, and the dominant competitor has been the same in software and chips. So if you, before and again, we've ever asked the question about where are these competitive advantages, what the history is telling us is that in CPU chips and in system software, there are big competitive advantages / barriers there. In hardware, there are not. Now, Steve Jobs has chosen to compete in all three businesses. So the fact that the iMac just is a terrific design doesn't answer the question of is he going to do well. There's also the question of the value of this integrated strategy of doing system software and doing the chips at the same time. Well, what we talked about is the history. You'd also like to know if these competitive advantages are going to be sustainable in the future. And so you want to know where they reside. Is there strong, stable customer captivity for Microsoft? How many of you are Microsoft slaves? How many of you are happy about it? Almost none of you. How many can do anything about it? Nothing. Everybody gets trained on Windows, they do Windows. Since they're going to do Windows, they get trained on Windows. They're going to share files, they want Windows. You learn Windows, you do Windows. It's a strong customer captivity. What about economies of scale in that business? They're massive. It's a fixed cost business. Somebody else wants to compete with Microsoft, they're going to have to spend probably $4 to $5 billion a year to do an operating system, and they've got to get the market share necessary to sustain them. And that's not going to be easy to do. There are huge economies of scale, and there are huge network economies. The more people who use it, the more valuable it becomes. So Microsoft, by the way, doesn't have proprietary technology. Revolutionary new technologies come from places like, who was the Explorer before? Netscape Explorer or Google and Search. They don't come from Microsoft. But the customer captivity and economies of scale are there. In the case of Intel, it's the same thing. Dell and Hewlett-Packard are not going to risk, having worked with Intel for so long and having learned to trust Intel quality, they're not going to go to some Chinese or Japanese or AMD outfit for all their supply. They are captive customers. The risk of going to a new supplier is just too high. There is also enormous R&D scale in that business. So Intel, if they have a good chip, they can expect to get 95% of the market. AMD may get 20% of the market. Intel can spend 5 to 10 times as much as AMD pursuing a new generation of chips. who's going to win that race all day long, sooner or later, even though intermittently AMD gets lucky? And the answer is Intel. That's economies of scale at work, protected by the customer captivity, so if they screw up, they don't lose their business. Again, they don't always produce the best technology. It's not proprietary technology always that's the best. There are huge competitive advantages there, and Intel has got them, and AMD doesn't, and Apple doesn't. In hardware, it's much more fluid. It's a level playing field. Well, if you look at Apple here, where does Apple lie? And this is for all of you in 1999 who thought or actually it's 2001 when the iPod came out, these guys were going to rule the world. Or when the iMac, the colored iMac came out, they were going to rule the world. And what you see is that they operate in the Mac space on a level playing field. But given that they won't use Intel chips, and they're tied to that, there's a huge competitive disadvantage in CPU chips. And given they don't support Windows, there's a huge competitive disadvantage in system software. From the whole period from 1982 to 1980, I think it's 6, what do you think happens to Apple's market share in computers? It just tanks. They make no profit over that period. They make less profit despite their wonderful graphic software than Adobe does by a large margin over that period. What Steve Jobs is doing is he is an Olympic-class swimmer in the race to produce the best PC. But by tying himself to his own operating system and to non-Intel chips, he's basically decided to swim that race with 2 giant concrete blocks tied to his ankles. Those competitive disadvantages in those related sectors. And what is his future in that race? Glug, glug, glug. What changed in 2006? And by the way, at the time, the people I was investing with were short Apple stock. We shorted at 135. When we started the class, it was down to 90. Everybody thought the iPod was going to rule the world, and there were rumors about the iPhone. I bet a kid in the class that the price would finish below 75. In the middle of the class, the price got down to 57. And what do you think Apple announced? They're going to support Windows, and they're going to use Intel chips. It was the absolute low. Thank God I got to cover the short. I lost the bet by a wide margin. And if you look at Apple's performance since then, it is overwhelmingly the computer division. So in a complex situation like Apple, where lots of different aspects of competitive advantage are in play, you want to have a systematic approach to putting into practice the analysis that Kano showed you. To first identify the segment, because what people were selling Apple on was Steve Jobs was a genius. And that was going to help him do well in PCs, but it wasn't going to help him overcome the competitive disadvantages in CPU chips and in operating system software. The second thing is, once you've got a view of the individual segments, which when you analyze them segment by segment and look at the future possibilities by identifying the sources and therefore the durability of the competitive advantages, you start to get, I think in this case, a very clear picture of what's going to happen. Are there any questions about that process? Because otherwise we should let you go. Oh yes, go ahead.
So in the case of Apple, you have, they're not just making chips, just making hardware, just making software. They're breaking the company down.
But their strategy is to tie the three together. Right? So the competitive disadvantages in chips matter, right?
If they were selling chips on their own.
No. If they're building inferior chips into their machines,
Going to sell. Yeah.
against machines that have Intel chips.
The point is that they're building chips suited for it.
Sorry?
I think they're building chips suited for their machines.
Apparently not.
If they have a competitive
That's fine.
advantage or disadvantage in doing any CPU chip.
Doing Intel CPUs?
Any CPU. Whose chips were going to be faster? Whose chips were going to be more up to date? Whose chips were going to have more features? Intel. Why did Steve Jobs announce he decided to switch? Because his own chip makers could not keep up with the technology. And if he's got inferior chips, is he operating in a CPU chip at a competitive advantage or disadvantage relative to Dell? If he doesn't support Windows, is he operating in a competitive or disadvantage or advantage compared to Compaq? These things are not divisible when your strategy is to do all of them.
Yeah.
Is that clear? If it's not, come down and I'll just shout it loud.
take like two.
Almost every value except for DeFi value.
I think I'm going to take one. Yeah.
It's just that you go get those applied value. And then there's a black
You can be able to other people can make phones. Jobs is a control freak. Why? once somebody gets all the applications, I don't want, I don't, the iPad, okay. Oh, let me know they do that. iPod's market share is dropping like price dropping. And that is another example of small jobs. When you bought two commodities, and once he gave that up, there's no advantage to the other one. And it's like the Walkman. The Walkman lasted for the market. Market shares are dropping. Well, yeah, these are low markets. The price at which they're selling them is dropping. When did the iPod come out? When did it really come out? So it's been a lot of you don't read their financials and look at which edition they sold. Guess when they sold it.
I think that the difference from the iPhone though and the Mac is that you can actually download any of the stuff. It is so. It's not like he's owned everything. Yeah.
You see, it's the lights are set. A lot of control. Locks and toolbox. And computers have devices anybody can make. It's a special device that are the markets that are small. And those are the operating systems. Buying these devices, all these the biggest problem is control.
New York City has 300 whatever you want. Yeah, I found myself. Yeah. Week after week after week. My burger place, I'm totally satisfied by that burger place. The fact that I know what I'm getting at, trust, the risk of venturing out. But once I'm in my comfort zone and I have maybe my changes and
Create a product that is worse.
I mean, there's huge advantage to being
People who are taking advantage of it, taking advantage and doing their own product. The answer is yes. You didn't have sales. You didn't have customers. It should be something. Operating system. Yes, because he supports Windows and he uses Intel chips. Trust me. You look at me. Yes. It wasn't. Right. Clear. Right. No, it's absolutely. Market share is dying. The stock is going to zero. I'm down to 35 to 57 bucks a share. In terms of this debt to the class, I'm down 90 to 50.
Then it becomes hugely valuable, and you turn something which isn't that advantage into
No, but I'm looking at operating performance.
for something else.
It absolutely turns around. Apple shares just run steady. You look at profitability. Maybe back the extraneous cash anywhere else. And that's the valuation process. If you want to go from there to equity, just subtract.
Okay, and then
And the reason you want to do that is because your errors are going to be made up.
Is that going to be?
So if you have a company that you think is worth, for example, it's got $900 million, and the equity is selling for $30 million. You look at the equity alone, it looks like you have $30 million, in value, $30 million. So you've got a real margin of safety of 7%. If you're off by, if you're off by 5%, you look at the value of the firm, your equity is like that. So you want to do it.
but you want to take out the debt service payments. You want to
Yeah, no, you always start. Remember how we started? Started operating earnings. You never took out the fees. It's operating earnings, we adjusted it. We adjusted for excess depreciation. And then we took out operating. Right, yes. You don't want to tell you. You just do the operation. And then subtract the error. Is that clear?
Yeah,
The reason I have someone like you or who weren't alive that have a sort of sense of, let's say, looking at the computer market, factors, where are you finding that information? I mean, is it sell-side industry reports? I mean, so
You wrote that for years. Somebody was working on it.
of whatever it is.
That actually, it's sort of, I guess, follows up with that. Looking at an apple, because I'm saying that they don't have second information on regulated financials, on how they perform in chips or how they perform in software. How do you
Yes, because that will tell you.
if I took this, and we had it in and out of the I would expect that.
So Apple would have rid of because cell market all the assets lost control.
What happens in circumstances where sometimes you have a multi-segment business, and the segments themselves may not operate well, but they themselves can serve as competitive advantage. You know what I mean? But if you will, for example,
Okay, give me an example.
so I just took these, which is basically your
Right, right.
and you do the final project, and it just worked out that the company shows you this world best. Now, and they have like 4 or 5 seconds of operation. The operating gives you a television, you activate a live event, and then you go left and right. So the cash cow is just able to do and left and right. Well,
You don't want to stay. If you look, who's the value of this? Who are the companies that provide wrestling?
You don't want
essentially don't operate.
There's
There's them, there's MMA, and there's boxing.
Right, but the 3 guys, the same guys in every segment. So you do the industry.
But they're not, they're not, when we did the industry map, we looked at it.
Combined.
Yeah, live, like essentially the same business model as like a Live Nation company that puts
No.
You don't think so?
Business here is
But the
it's
economics,
not, the business here is wrestling. Because you're producing wrestling content. And in the wrestling business, you have these subsectors.
yeah,
Okay, and each subsector your guys.
yeah.
So typically, what you see in the
dominant in all the segments, which they are at one point or another, just look at it like one business. Just think of it as one business, which essentially it is, because it works as an entire business, and it doesn't work individually. So it makes sense that to analyze it as a single business. But it's a bit of a weird example too, because there's not a lot of players in that space. But anyway, so thanks.
Yes, you're the Kenyan. Yeah, I think that went really well, and I think I did what you wanted me to do, which was if you had, you got tired of it.
Exactly. It's kind of inaction, so maybe they can think of it and you know that story.
Yeah, absolutely. And they hate it. This complicated story, they hate it because they love speed jobs, and they all want to grow up to be speed jobs without the rest of them. Yeah, those down good time. Okay, and we're gonna have a really good time. It's all about the scumbag. And how do you identify when scumbag does a really undisclosed damage versus disclosed damage?
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Great for me.
No.
I think you did it.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you. They should be the judges of that, you know.
Yes, it's one of my office. Because you have something that I have to help you with. Because you're doing something absolutely wrong. And I have to get you to remember it. Which is why I'm going to yell at you. It's not that I'm going to yell at you because you're doing something bad. It's just that you're doing something that's going to make you a bad at